welcome back to another bot framework episode. And there hasn't been much happening over the last year or so, so I haven't been doing too many videos. But very recently at Microsoft Ignite, they have announced the bot framework Composer. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to share my thoughts on this and help you get started with it. So the first thing is to go to the GitHub repository for it, and it's just called Bot Framework Composer here. And if you just have a look through the instructions, it gives you some idea of what we're going to expect. So obviously, the first big thing you can see here is it's a visual designer. And to be honest, this is what people have been crying out for to get this working, because it lays things out in a very simple way. You can see the flows, it's a much more visual experience, and lots of advantages to doing it this way, especially when you consider the domain that bots tend to run in. They tend to be in situations where other people have interest in how the bot will work and what sort of conversational aspects of it. And it's really good that they can see it for themselves. They don't need to be overly technical in order to understand what's going on. That's really what I'm trying to say there. So anyway, let's have a quick look at what's going on. So it's a preview, so obviously it's open to change, and you shouldn't be using this for production, but it's probably a really good idea to get a good idea of how this is going to work, so practice on it. The technology underneath it you can use in all sorts of different areas or when it's released, so that'd be really good to do. And yeah, let's just dig in. So the first thing to do is you need to install quite a bit of things to get this working. So here we can see it's telling us to go and get these, run these yarn scripts. Now, if you don't know what all these things are, then if you follow this link to create your first bot, it'll get to this link here. It says follow the instructions to set up a composer using yarn. So then you can click that link, and then we get into the actual installation process. So the first thing we need to do is go off to this link here and clone this. So I've already done this in Visual Studio, so if we just flick back over here. So this is what this ends up looking like. I go back to the instructions. And then you go into the Composer folder. So let's just follow those instructions. So here is the Composer folder. Now, if you, like me, you've got the extra prompts in Visual Studio, you can just come in here and say, open the developer prompt. If not, you can just open the folder that pops open, and then you can just type in command in here, and that will take you to the same folder. So that's nice and easy. So back to the instructions. So it says run yarn install. Now what that's going to do is it's going to go off and use various kind of node type libraries and install all the various JavaScript libraries that you need to run the designer. So that's the important thing. It's the designer that's running under the JavaScript stuff. Or I should also point out these prerequisites. You need to go off and install these. Make sure you've got all these, including the latest emulator. It's important you get all of these things. And if you click on here, it's just going to take you straight to the tab. So I would advise you to sort of right click and launch these. And it will take quite a long time to install these if you haven't already got them. Anyway, so I've done the yarn install already. So that's installed the JavaScript libraries, and that does take a bit of time. Then you do the yarn build, which then builds things like the TypeScript libraries. That's a form of JavaScript library. So that needs to sort of compile those libraries and get them ready. And that can take a long time. And also note that when you do that, you get the prompts and you can see the feedback coming back, but often it will just stop and look like it's just not doing anything. Just be patient and wait for it to finish. As I say, you can definitely go and make yourself a drink while you're waiting for that. It does take a long time. But eventually, when you get to it, you can then do yarn start all, and that is going to actually run the JavaScript libraries and get and spin up a listener for the HTTP, and therefore the designer will start to work. Well, hopefully, let's have a look. So let's do yarn start all. So as you can see here, it's using npm node package manager, so it's going to do all the starting for that in the background for us. You can see his node is starting a server here, and eventually it's going to come and say, yeah, we're starting at localhost 3000. Yeah, I think it's ready for us, and the bot is listening to that. So that's kind of typical for the bot. The bot will start listening on another HTTP. So let's just take a copy of that and launch it in the browser and see what we get. So here we are, and we're launching into one of the dialogues that I've already had open. So let's not do that straight away. Let's go to the home page. And yeah, I can see that I've been playing with this a few days ago. But let's just go through, I think an example. Let's go through the weather example. I think that's a really good example to start with. So let's come back here. Creating an Echo bot. That's just an example of Apple bot. You know all about Echo bots. So let's have a look at the weather bot. I think this is a really good example. So it tells us to start creating from scratch. So we come in here, do a new, create from scratch, and you want it to be an empty bot, I believe. There's a create scratch. Yeah. So let's just call this weather bot video. Why not? And just a quick note where it's going. So it's going into the same place as the repository. So let's just create that. And then we're left with this sort of starting screen, which is pretty simple stuff. So the second screen asks for name and description, and yeah, we've done all that. That's all good. Give your bot something to say. Okay, so this is now into the realms of what we're used to with the bot. So we've got a little conversation start mechanism here, and you notice that these things are called triggers. So this is a concept that's coming in from something called the dynamic adaptive dialogues, well, just adaptive dialogues. And this is a technology that is in preview as well, and you don't need a designer to use that. But the designer's making good use of it, and to be honest, the two work really well together. They're made for each other. And this has a concept of triggers. So this is just like an event trigger. Something happens, and then you start to use a visual designer to tell it what to do when it has that trigger. And you'll see more about this as you use adaptive dialogues more often. But for now, it's very simple. It's just the same kind of trigger that we used to in the bot, that we got a conversation starting. So the things just to note in here is this is our conversation start, and it's already got this concept of a sort of dynamic script in here. So we got basically a sort of JavaScript like language, and you can see here that we're saying that if this condition is met, so we're getting a connection and it's not from the bot, then we know it's going to be a user. Now, if you're familiar with writing bots, you'll know this kind of thing is something that you have to write anyway, because you get a kind of two-step connection when you first start a dialogue, and part of it is the bot connecting. So you don't want to start the conversation with the actual bot mechanism, you want to start it with the user. So that's what this is saying. So that's quite interesting already. Now let's start by adding an action. So an action to this trigger. So we're going to just send a response, and we're going to put something in here. It just tells you what to do here. You can follow along with this exactly if you want, that's fine. And we're going to enter in welcome to the video weather forecast. Now, as you can see as I'm typing, we're already getting some kind of IntelliSense, so we're getting a load of functions here that are coming in. So you can see that the scripting language that's going to be built into this is going to be quite powerful. Now, obviously, it's going to be a dynamic language to a certain extent. There is some checking as you go along, but it's not quite the same as maybe you're used to if you're using C#. But anyway, let's just carry on with the text. So this is actually using another underlying technology called language generation, as it says here. And we'll see more about that later on. But you can add, this is a kind of combination of doing a scripting language. So you can add sort of scripted text. So you can say things like, hello, name, and it will insert the person's name. You can also do Q&A maker style work. So if you notice here, there's this little dash, and what it's kind of telling it is this is an example of what we might want to say when we come in here. But if you add another line with another dash, it will randomly choose between the two. So you can have that sort of personality where you're not rigidly saying the same thing constantly. You can actually give it alternatives, and that's a really nice thing. And this whole language generation thing, there's a whole swathe of different things you can do there. Again, like the adaptive dialogues, that technology is in preview. And again, like adaptive dialogues, you could use that directly outside of the designer. But again, this works really well with the designer. All these things coming together to make a really good experience. So we've done that. There's no kind of saving going on. So we're just going to try and start the bot now. Okay, that's on our publish Lewis models. Why are we publishing Lewis models? That's a good point. So let's go back to the main thing. So the main thing here is the whole of this bot is set up to use Lewis as its recognizer mechanism. So we're just going to turn it off for now. We don't want to be doing that. So let's just start the bot now. And then we can say test in emulator. So let's run the old emulator. Hopefully that will spin up reasonably quickly. Here it comes. And there's our welcome message. So it's all tied in, really easy to do. It's taken no time at all to do that, apart from me waffling on. So let's carry on with this little thing here. Show what else can we do? So we've done the trigger, done a little message there. We've done the language understanding, changing it. We tested it, and we've seen it work. So let's add a dialogue. Go to the next step. So dialogues are the same, pretty much the same concept as we used to before. They're a way of componentizing an aspect of the bot, typically some kind of conversational backwards and forwards between the bot and the user, where the bot's trying to gain some information. And what they're going to do here is we're going to try and capture what the user's zip code or postcode is, depending on where you live, and then we're going to call an API to try and get some weather. So let's go and follow these instructions. So to create a new dialogue, we come in here and we press the new dialogue thing. And we're going to call this the get weather dialogue. Okay, fair enough. I'm not a JavaScript person, so I like to use a capital get weather. Okay, that seems fair enough. So again, we have triggers, just like we did in the main dialogue. That's basically what we're talking about there. That's the main dialogue. We've got our new get weather dialogue. We've got a begin dialogue here, and again, we've got a trigger here that the dialogue is starting. So you might want to do something based on that. Let's carry on following their example. Okay, so we're just going to send an activity. That's fair enough. So as soon as the dialogue starts, we send a response, and it's just going to be let's find your forecast. Okay, and you see it's responding in here. So again, the visual designer is doing a really good job of showing you what's going to happen. You can see the flow really easily. That's great. Okay, we're going to wire up the dialogues. Okay, so it says to click on the bot, the get weather bot in the main, and we're going to add some Lewis style recognizers, but it's not actually Lewis. So what you can do here is rather than go full-blown Lewis, we can just come into regular expression, and we can say we're going to have a weather intent, and the pattern is just when the user says weather. Right, so you can do more interesting patterns, but it's just a nice simple one. Okay, so we've done that now. We've added our regular expression, and now what we need to do is create a new trigger using that. So we come in here and actually just going to add the trigger onto the dialogue or the main dialogue. The main dialogue, that's fine. So we come in here, create a new trigger. The trigger is an intent-based trigger, and the intent we've defined is weather. So that's really easy. And then when this weather trigger comes in, what we're going to do, what's they saying doing? Are they going to just launch a dialogue straight away? Click there. In the submenu, beginning with it. Yeah. So we're going to come in here and we're going to do dialogue management, begin a new dialogue. Oh, that's one thing I should point out as well, is that when you follow these instructions, because it's preview and these things are changing all the time, the instructions aren't necessarily one for one with what you'll see in the design. So you have to, just sort of run with the flow a little bit, figure it out as you go. So let's begin a new dialogue. And the dialogue name, it's already picked the one that we've defined already, so that's great. And that's just going to call that and execute that. So what we've done so far is, if we come back to the main bot, let's just see what's going on. We've got our get weather dialog. So we expect that when this comes in, we're going to, sorry, this is our get weather trigger. It's going to call the get weather dialog. Can you click on that, I wonder? And yes, you can. So you click on that, it takes you to the get weather dialog. That's nice. And then our get weather dialog starts, and it's going to say, let's find our forecast. So let's restart the bot. Come back to the emulator, and I'll just restart the conversation. So welcome to the video forecast. And now if we type in weather, let's find your forecast. So it's now launched that dialogue. That dialogue has responded to us. So it's all really simple stuff. It's, I mean, complicated stuff if you had to do this by hand, but really simple with a designer. So where else are we going with this? So let's check some weather. So get weather. Right, and now we start to get a little bit more interesting. So now we're going to ask a question. Right. So we come in here. What's the next thing to do in the flow? Ask a question. We want some text input. So we're going to prompt the user and say, please enter your zip code. Now, when I first did this, I did postcode because zip code's an American thing and not a UK thing. Stick with zip code because later on we're going to use an API that's zip code only. So don't fall for that trap. Okay, so let's have a little look what's going on here. So we've got some things that you might be familiar with the bot, the existing bot framework. So you've got a max turn count. So if you enter in some details that we don't consider as valid, then the bot will prompt you 3 times before it gives up. Obviously, you can increase that and change that, and that's based on the fact that you've got some kind of user validation. So if we come into the user input first, so let's have a look how what we're going to do with that data that they've entered. So we ask for the bot. You can set the default value here to 9502 if you wanted. That's fine. I'm not going to do that. So the user input, here we can specify what we're going to do with it. So we are going to put it into an object called user, and we're going to set the property called zip code. And notice it's all lowercase. That's fine. So this is using kind of more of a dynamic language. We haven't defined this object called user zip code anywhere. We haven't written a class for it or a structure or anything like that. This is just going to use a very much more dynamic mechanism and just populate it with this thing called zip code. And we can add little things on there, so make it lowercase. In this case, we're just going to trim it. That's fine. Now we look at the validation. So if it's unrecognized, what we're going to say, I'm just going to grab it from here. So the unrecognized prompt is this. Okay, so let's just walk over this a bit. So sorry, I don't understand. And now it's using the kind of expression based formatting. I can't remember the correct name. Is that the right word? I don't think so. But anyway, you have curly brackets, which means it's come out of the string kind of formatting and do something more code-like. So it's just going to say that it's this current object and whatever value. So when you type something in, the value is what you typed in is in the value property. And then it's just telling us what we should be doing with that. That's fine. And then it's going to say in the invalid prompt. So if it doesn't recognize what you've typed, that's one thing. If it does sort of recognize what you typed, but it's still wrong, it doesn't meet the validation criteria, then we're going to say this message. So it's pretty much the same thing again. We're using this value. So now we need to add a validation rule, and again, this is using a JavaScript-y way of doing it. So we just paste this in, and we're just saying the value that you've entered just has to be 5 characters. So you could type in the old junk, A, B, C, D, and that'll be fine. But as long as it's 5 characters, we're going to let it through. So it's not a clever, particularly clever validation rule, but there we go. It'll do for now. Good enough for government work, as they say. So that's great. So we're going to do that. The validation rule is entered by pressing garage return. So they're quite explicit about that. So we should have something that looks like this now. And let's find the forecast. Please enter your zip code. You enter the zip code, and then we're going to do something. So this looks good. It's all in the flow here. We can see that we've got a kind of error flow out of this and a good flow through it. So that all looks good. So all these options set. Yeah. So now we're going to add a request to go and do something interesting. So we're going to go off and access an external source. So we're going to send a HTTP request. And now we get our little property dialog for HTTP requests. So we've got the various verbs here we can do. So in this case, we're going to do a get. We need the URL. So here we see, again, some of this dynamic nature coming in. So we've got our URL here, which is this WeatherBot API for doing zip codes. We're going to set the zip code parameter, and we're passing in this kind of dynamic expression-y bit. So we're sending in the user and the zip code, again using the curly brackets to explain to it this is the dynamic area. I don't think we've got any body to send in. It's just going to be straightforward get request. The only additional thing it's telling us to do here, which is really important, is what we're going to do with the result. So we're going to, oops, gone off the ball there. Oh no, I've completely, phew. Dialog API, okay, so that's fine. So we come in here, we're going to have the object called dialog, which is the current object doing. Again, these are sort of things you have to kind of learn that this object is available. It's just one of those things. And we're going to put it into the zip code. That's right, the API response is rubbish. We're going to put it into an object called API response. Right, so that's good. Again, dynamic objects all working, no problem. The response type is JSON, that's all good. Okay. So the dialogs come in, we've done all of our dialoginess. So we're going to add a condition, and we're going to add an if condition. So what happens if the API didn't succeed? So we've got these branches now. So we've got a false branch and a true branch. So again, this is all in the Visual Designer. It's all nice. So in the true branch, we're going to say, we're going to set a property. And we're going to do a dynamicness again. So we're going to say on the dialog object, we're going to set this new property that we've just dreamt up called weather. And the value we're going to put in is the dialog API response that we've just set. And we're going to set the content. So this will probably be the body of the message coming back from the API. This is a very common API pattern. But again, you sort of have to know that there's something called dialog, you have to know there's something called API response, and you have to know that the thing in the API response is called content. These are, the visual design is still, it's got things that could be improved upon, right? And I think this is one of those sort of areas. But anyway, it's good. All good so far. So we're going to put that in there, we're going to get the weather, we're going to get response. Now, what I haven't done is I haven't actually put the condition in. So, condition. The condition is that the dialog.api response object, its status code, so again, it's in kind of JavaScript world, is equal to 200, which is an OK message. So we're expecting that if the API is OK, that true condition is met, we're going to set the dialog weather content. If it's not OK, what are we going to do with the not OK? Is it just going to say, oh dear, or something? Yeah, set the variant, set the weather to that. The true branch, yeah, we've done that. What we're going to do in the bad, I got an error, fine. So in the false branch, we're going to send a response, I guess. And the response is, I got an error, and then it's going to go to the content, and hopefully the error message will be in the content. Otherwise, we're going to send a response to say something nice about the weather, I'd imagine. Oh, we've already done that up here. Yes, here it is. We'll come back to this in a second as well. So again, in our language generation, we're going to put in the weather is, and then dialog.weather object. And unfortunately, the weather property has something else called weather, which is where the forecast is going to be. Never mind. And the temperature is weather.temperature. And then we just say it's degrees. Okay, so one additional little step that they suggest you do is when you get the error, do some bit of nice housekeeping and set the property. So our property, I think, was is it dialog dot, was it weather? Coming here and doing this on the fly. Okay, where are we? So added external messages. Where's the false? The true branch, do that. Oh, I got an error. To be on the safe side, I'll do delete property, delete the zip code. Right, okay, that's fair enough. So what we're doing here is we're going to do users of zip code, not dialog. Oh, actually, not set property. Let's get rid of that. Let's delete that. And manage properties. We're going to delete a property. And we're going to delete the user.zip code, i.e. we're going to clear out what the user entered into the zip code if we got a bad response. So I think that's all pretty much there. I don't think they want us to do anything else. So let's restart the bot. Now then, this is going to be interesting because I'm not in America. So let's have a little look. Welcome to the weather forecast. So we enter our intent. I think it's something like, is it 20, 40, 40? Is that somewhere in California? No, it's not. Oh, I've fallen foul for the 5-digit. Is it 24040? Excellent. So we saw the validation rule kick in, gave us that prompt, and then I've managed to feed it a zip code that's valid, and it's telling us that the weather is clear and the temperature is 32 degrees. So that's great. So it's a little example of a dialogue, and that shows off quite a lot of the features here that we've been working on. And I just want to then flip over. You know, you can add all sorts of things. They've got help commands. It will go off and it will explore all sorts of different aspects of how you can interrupt the dialogues and everything like that. But I don't really want to go into that. I don't want to just be holding your hand going through this. But what I want to do is to show you what's actually going on, a few things that are behind the scenes with this. So if we go to our back to Visual Studio now, and I'm just going to come into this project, show in File Explorer. Now in here there's a folder called My Bots. Let's just open that. Why is that taking forever to open? Strange. And here are my projects. So these are the visual designer has been throwing out. And here's our weather bot. So the first thing you'll notice, or hopefully I want to point out to you, is this is a C# project. So this is a typical bot that you might have designed previously yourself, hand-coded it. And what the designer's done is it's created a project for us. This is our bot project. In fact, let's open that. Let's just do this. Hopefully I won't come with any kind of locking conflicts with the designer. Oh, it's opened up in Visual 2017. That's remarkably unhelpful. Never mind, keeps it separate. And we'll just wait. Oh, donut here. Come on, donut. Okay, so a couple of kind of fun things to notice here. Again, this is just a bot project. There's nothing particularly different, and that's quite a thing to say. I'll try and explain that later. And we've also got a test project, which is quite interesting for bots because we're not really used to having test projects with our bots. So another aspect we got here is we do actually have, I think this is in preview 2, the new testing mechanism. So we can just here, we've got some nice kind of bot things. You make some choice, you can assert a reply. So that's quite nice. And I think this is also another mechanism that's coming in and will hopefully be available all at the same sort of time frame. So this is great. We got a new testing mechanism. That's good. So let's just have a little look what's going on behind the scenes of this new mechanism. So we've got our usual stuff. We're creating some middleware. Got all our credentials. We're creating a bot, loading those in from app settings, all that sort of usual stuff. Here's one of the kind of important differences, or these important differences, I should say. So we've got the user adapted dialogues, user resource explorer, and I'll try and explain a little bit what that is, and use language generation. So these are a few of these new mechanisms that, as I said earlier, that the visual designer is making a big use of. So there is the resource explorer and adaptive dialogues. Let's have a little looky at what's happening there. So I believe these generated dialogues. Yeah. So we come in here and we can see these folders like the get weather and main, and these are the things that we've been creating in the designer. So let's have a little look at what this is. So you can see here that it's just a JSON representation, and this is really what the adaptive dialogues is all about. It's giving you a mechanism to well, I think it's what it's about. It's giving you a mechanism to create a structure that isn't hard-coded into the language. So it allows you to be more flexible. You could store this in a database, for example, or rather than on the file, and you could be bringing these in and changing them on the fly dynamically. So it opens up a lot of interesting ideas, and obviously one of those interesting ideas is now we can have a designer that's just writing these files, and that makes it much easier for the designer. So you can see our conditions in here that we've been writing. You may also note that these activities have IDs, and that's important because of the other technology that we're looking at, which is the language generation, and we'll see that in a second. You can see our branches, you can see all these sort of things in here, our deleting of a property, all the things that we've just done. So that's what's happening there. And the other aspect, there's a language kind of generation aspect of it. Well, sorry, the Loo file is a newish, again, technology to do with Lewis, so it allows you to define your Lewis statements locally rather than having to go off to a separate portal and define it. So again, these are all really good features, and they're all coming together to make our life a lot easier. Okay, so if we go back to main, just check the main dialog. So again, this is our bot stuff. We can see our conditions when we're getting this and our triggers. So all this information, it's all held in JSON that we've been doing in the designer. I don't think there'll be anything in here yet. No. So what else have we got in here? Let's have a little look around. So our Lewis data, I don't think there'll be much in there. Yeah, we haven't published anything from that. Right, now the common language generation stuff. So if you remember back in this weather dialog, got all these sorts of activities. So send a response activity. Let's have a look at this one and see if I can find this one. So you see, yeah, there we are. So that string that we entered in here, because this is like a string library in my head, something called a string library. So we have an activity and we haven't recorded what we typed in here. We've recorded a reference to the language generation file, and that reference is held here, and then that's got the let's find your forecast. So this is decoupled the strings that you're typing in to the logic, and that's really helpful because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is that we can now give this to an author, technical writer, that kind of thing, managers or whoever that isn't necessarily as technical as someone who's writing the logic, and they can just change and maintain this text in here. Obviously, you do have to learn some of the kind of weird technical aspects like these expressions. Um, the other thing is it also opens up the door to allow you to do different languages. So you could just do this in French, for example, and then German, whatever the languages you want to support. So it opens the door to that as well, and that's helpful. But this actually contains a lot of interesting things you can do. As I mentioned before, you can do a kind of Q&A maker personality type thing in here where we can add more responses to the same string. So we could just sort of, well, I won't get in the way of the design. I don't know if you'll be touching that right now. Might be a bit fragile. Haven't tested that. And it allows you to, as I say, create more responses. So rather than let's find your forecast, you can say, oh, I wonder what your weather is today, that sort of thing, and make it a bit more interesting for the user, different sorts of responses. So yeah, that's what's going on in the background there. That's all interesting. I want to touch on that a little bit more. So let's go back to the designer. And I'm going to leave the weather forecasting for now because that's quite a good one. So I'll leave it up to you to carry on looking at that. And one of the things I wanted to look at is you've got all these examples here, and one of them is responding with cards. So if I open that sample, or the unrecognized intent, that's a nice one as well. You'll see that in the weather. I won't spoil that for you. So unfortunately, this thing doesn't drag open, so I'm going to have to open my window. Make it a bit easier to view it all. So what's happening here is just any old nonsense that you type in, bot is going to ask what card. Let's have a look at this. Let's click on it properly. So which card would you like to display? And now we've got a nice user choice here. So again, an interesting way of providing that what you might have used before, the user choice thing. This is now a visual representation of that. So again, we're going to populate the user choice. We've got a locale to do it in. That's nice. The format is in list. So we've got all our sort of typical hero card things, other things we could be doing. Here are our choices, which is hero card, adaptive card, video card, all these sorts of different things. A nice separator. So there's quite a lot of kind of functional things you can be doing in here. Always prompts, it's always going to stick this up regardless of whether you're getting it right or wrong. Okay, sorry. The always prompt is more about if the property is already populated, then if you had always prompt off, it would just pass straight through because the bot already knows about it. What always prompt does is says, well, regardless of if I know this value, I'm going to ask you again. So that's what that's doing. Right, so we've got this branch user choice here. So this is like a kind of giant if condition. And if you chose hero card, then we're going to do hero card. Okay, so that looks a bit, well, that's odd. What does hero card mean? If it's going to be the card with memory, it's going to do a little bit of activity here. Thumbnail card, again, sort of strange looking thing. Thumbnail card, what's that? Yeah. Right, all the way down to animation cards. These are all sorts of different cards you might be familiar with, but normally you'd be expecting to enter some more information than just card. Right? I mean, what does that mean? And even adaptive card, which is the sort of ultimate flexible, but you populate it with lots of stuff card. I mean, even that's not doing anything, so that's a bit weird. So what's going on there? Well, what's actually happening is it's using a feature of the language generation. Again, so let's go back to our language generation. So we looked at language generation file in Visual Studio, but you can see these by using the bot, this little robot thing here. So now I'm looking at all of our responses. So here's the name, that hero card that we saw earlier. It was just hero card. Well, that is defined a bit like the string library. So when it sees hero card, what it's actually going to produce is this kind of language generation syntax, which is kind of chat down syntax that allows you to define your hero card here. So this one is going to say the title, subtitle, some text, got an image in it, it's got buttons in it. And you also notice that these buttons have this, again, it's sort of pseudo hidden. This is where its design is still a little bit raw for me. So you kind of have to know that there's this function called card action template, and it's going to send an IM back, which is just kind of like it's like an immediate post back to the user so they can see the show more cards template. And again, that's going to be somewhere around here as well. All these sort of things, you've got all these string libraries, all these different cards are defined here. And again, what they've done is they're taking away the logic and the presentation. So whereas before the logic was doing some sort of if condition, and then we had a string to say, welcome. Now we're doing, okay, you've got some sort of condition that is going to be showing a video card, and we're just saying video card, and then the presentation of that video card is now held here. So this again will allow other people, content editors, etc., to make these changes, change which bunny poster they want to put up there, or whatever they is they want to change. So again, without having to redo the logic, nice, clean separation. It's all good. I just wanted to point out this kind of indirection with the adaptive card. So with the adaptive card, it's a similar thing. It's going to issue this activity with attachments. So it doesn't have a specific case for adaptive cards as yet. But this again is going to use another kind of weird function that you're just going to have to know for the moment. Obviously, if you look at the references for language generation, you'll see these with any luck. And it's going to say the adaptive card JSON. Well, okay, is that another magic thing? And where's that coming from? No, this is actually an indirection. So we've gone from adaptive card, that's already an indirection into this page. It's got another reference. So this adaptive card JSON is actually this text down here. And here we've got a very kind of typical JSON that matches the adaptive card. But this is using yet another newish technology, and this is going to be doing binding with adaptive cards. So normally with adaptive cards, you'd probably be doing that in code rather than in JSON, because with the JSON stuff, you can only see a static card. In here, what we're going to be doing is we can see that we've got our kind of body stuff, which is typical. But these text blocks, it's using this kind of @ syntax, and we're actually grabbing hold of things like passenger name in here, and we could be getting the date, we could be getting an the aeroplane from API call like we just saw with the weather. So you can see here that even this whole kind of separation of stuff that's going on, it still doesn't mean that you're going to end up with a really inflexible string in here. These things can still go back into the data and start using the data directly. So it's really powerful stuff. So I just wanted to call that out. And one very last thing, we just go back to the designer into our unrecognized intent. One last option that they offer here is all cards, right? So you come into all cards. So again, all cards, what does that do? Another weird magic thing. Well, we know what that means. It means it's somewhere in here. There's going to be something called all cards. So we have a look down here. Here we are. Here's all cards. And this is an activity, and it's going to have an attachment. So it's going to be sending in the hero card. For those that don't know, this kind of bar is meaning that it's going to kind of logically OR all these together. So we're going to get this hero card, and we're going to get the thumbnail card, and we're going to get the sign card. It doesn't mean it's going to be one of those, it's going to be all of these. So if you're not familiar with that sort of syntax. Now, the one thing that I was wondering about is how to do carousels. And here we see this attachment layout thing. So that piqued my interest because this is where you normally define a carousel. And it's saying attachment layout type. Well, okay, well, I'm not falling for this trap again because attachment layout type is another indirection into this. So attachment layer type, oh look, here it is just above, attachment layer type, and it's going to be carousel or list. Well, that's interesting. What does that mean, carousel or list? Well, how do I make it a carousel, or how do I make a list? That's interesting. What's going on here? So let's just restart the bot. Hopefully this will work with the other one still running. So we come back to the bot. Let's just restart this. So this is a card sample. I think you just type in anything, I guess. Yep. So which card would you like to display? Now I'm going to say 9 for all cards. Now, what you may know, and you may notice if what's happened here is this is a carousel. So this is the first card, second card, and then we've got these little carousel scrolly things. Allows us to move between them. Okay, now let's go back to what we were looking at here. The attachment type is carousel. Okay, but why is it saying list? So let's just flip back here. So it's prompted us again. Let's try 9 again. Now this time, it's a list. Let's try it again. And this time, it's a carousel. And what's the betting that if I do 9 again, it'll be a list? It's not, it's a carousel. Ah, that's the thing with randoms, you can never quite get it. Let's try again. And now it's a list. So this is quite interesting, it's quite fun. So this is a kind of the personality thing that I was telling you about. So when you enter these separate lines, it's going to give you a choice of carousel or list. So even though we're used to doing this kind of thing with strings, you know, like saying hello or hi or welcome, there's different options. You can do it now with data types as well. So that's a really interesting idea. So we're feeding in what is essentially a personality trait as actual data into a data type. So the attachment layout is changing based on that. So I think that's really interesting. And it certainly fooled me when I first looked at it. I thought, oh, how's that working? Yeah, so that is all I'm really going to say about this for now. Lots of things. You can try all sorts of things out here. The Lewis stuff is great as well. I'll probably do a little video on that maybe next. Oh yeah, actually, let's just rerun back to the code. I haven't quite finished showing that bit of the code. So that was Visual Studio 2017. Don't be doing that. Just wanted to call out what's actually happening in the Composer bot itself. So this is our main bot. Let's just confirm that. So we got our bot startup, our various bot settings. Where's our actual main bot? It's going to be in here somewhere. So the Resource Explorer, so this is the thing that's going in here and finding these maps and doing, so it understands when we call the Get Weather dialog to go and fetch the Get Weather dialog, go and actually find that information and bring it in. So that's what's happening here. There we are, here's our main bot, our Composer bot, and it's created this thing called main dialog, which is the name that the visual designer has given it. So if we come into the Composer bot, which is sort of what we're used to doing, oh, it's a bug here, by the way, and they've declared that twice. I'm sure that will get sorted out. So it's going to come into the main Composer dialog, and it's going to start doing its work in here. Now, here's our main on turn async that we're used to. So all that is going to do is it's going to pass it directly to the dialog manager and then finish. So this is literally the only thing that we do. When normally we'd have got a lot of code doing our own case statements, our bot has now pretty much been converted to just dialog manager on turn async, and then that's it. We leave it alone, and then all of the designer stuff that we've been looking at takes over and does our work for us. So yeah, so hopefully this has whetted your appetite to go and look at the designer a bit more. Again, it is only in preview at the moment, so don't put it into production just yet, but I would really recommend you take a look at it and see that see how powerful it is and get used to some of these functions and get ready to start using it. Okay, thanks for listening.